Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is the one and only Michael Dickson, Executive Director of Stand With Us. I am so excited to be speaking to you, Michael, not only because we share a common background, having both taught at one of the most exciting educational institutions in the world, at JFS, but also because I follow you on social media and you are someone who's an inspiration to everyone. For those of you who don't follow Michael, I suggest you do. I think you were voted one of the top 10 most influential Jews on social media.
14. I came in at 14, Rabbi. 14.
Okay, well, you know what? That's
all right.
higher than anyone else that I've spoken to, so that's fantastic. Michael is also heading up the team in Jerusalem, responsible for an array of amazing stuff. We're going to find out about Stand With Us and what they do. And at the end of this video, I'm going to include a short video about Stand With Us so you can find out more about some of the incredible stuff that they are involved with. Michael's also an accomplished writer. He's recently published his book, Is Resilience, which is going to tell us a little bit about that. And he is famous for his social media situation room, which has been a key part of Hasbara, should we say, around the Jewish world over the last decade and beyond. Michael, you're also a senior fellow at the at Bar-Ilan University, and you were known to be one of the 30 Israelis making a difference in the Aliyah 100 list. You were in the top 30 of for making a significant contribution to the Jewish world. Now, the list of accolades go on, and we could be here all day. I'm really honored you're here. How are you? And tell us about the last month of your life.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I appreciate the invitation very much. The last few weeks and months of my life, I mean, it's been like most Israelis, really, very unpredictable, very worrying. You know, we were under fire. You deal with it yourself. You try and do your day-to-day, but you can't. Your family bears the brunt as well, and everyone's in the same boat. Plus, all the time, you're dealing with what's going on around you. And, you know, we've lived here for 15 years. We moved from the UK, made Aliyah in 2006. We had two small children. My eldest daughter was 2 and my son was 9 months old. And since then we have 5 kids, and we've seen a lot in that time, you know, and living in Israel means that you see a lot. But we had to deal once again with loss and suffering and threat and fear that, you know, our young men and women are fighting on our behalf and worry about them. So there's a lot been going on. We've been in and out of bomb shelters. My youngest kids were sleeping in the bomb shelter. And I was saying goodnight to my youngest daughter one night. And she turned to me and she said, Abba, good night, stay safe. I just thought, wow, you know, this is my youngest worrying about me while she goes to bed. And it's these kind of situations that you sort of only really deal with when you're in them. On the professional side, I'm very lucky in that working for Stand With Us, I get to work with an incredible team who are getting information out and really the truth of the situation out all around the world. You mentioned social media. It is very much on social media. And as you said, we set up a social media situation room, but we do it in myriad ways. And we've been very successful in doing it. And so professionally, I'm very lucky in that my passion is my job, and I get to fulfill a mission that I believe is extraordinarily important on my day-to-day life.
That's remarkable. And I think actually your mission has never been more important, because the Jewish people are fighting 2 wars at the moment. There's our brothers and sisters in Israel who have been recently, thank God we've got a ceasefire now, but recently fighting a physical war, a threat to life with constant barrage of bombings. But beyond that, in the diaspora, we're also fighting a war of anti-Semitism, of those around us who demonize Jewish people and cross that line of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel. And it's very complex. And the work that you do is so, so important. Standing with us, standing up for the Jewish people has never been more important. And a lot of people in my community and across the wider community are worried, Michael. Do you think we have what to be worried about? What's the answer? What's the advice for those kids on campus, for those people in the workplace who are standing in the coffee rooms with their colleagues, really kind of, you know, attacking them, so to speak? And it's really unpleasant. What's your advice for us, Michael?
Yeah, the concern is absolutely justified. I mean, we know it, we feel it. Anti-Semitism has been rising for a while. And of course, the reaction, the response by some to the situation in Israel has been to double down on that. and we've seen it turn into very real world anti-Semitic events. And so, yes, we should be concerned. I would be lying to you if I told you that anti-Semitism is something that's going to go away. It is not. We know that from our history. But of course, there are things that we can do. We have to be aware of what anti-Semitism is. One of the things that we need to do is to encourage institutions and organizations and cities and indeed countries to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. That's the IHRA. And I encourage everyone watching to have a look at the IHRA website and learn what that definition is, because what it does basically is it codifies anti-Semitism and makes it easy to identify what anti-Semitism is. Natan Sharansky wrote an article in the Jerusalem Post many years ago called the 3Ds, and he defined anti-Semitism as delegitimization, double standards of Israel, and demonization of Israel. He was talking about when does it cross the line? When does criticism of Israel cross the line into anti-Semitism? And he used those 3 examples as defining what anti-Semitism is. The reason he called it the 3Ds is because it's like the picture can look very blurry. You see the TV news, you see Israel, you hear a comment, you see an action, you're not sure if it's anti-Semitic. Well, it's like a 3D movie that, then you put on the glasses and suddenly you can see. So Sharansky's 3Ds were actually more or less codified within this IHRA definition. And it's very, very important to understand that anyone can criticize Israel. Sometimes you hear people say, oh, well, you're just saying you can't criticize Israel. For me, that's a straw man argument. No one is making that argument. You want to hear criticism of Israel? Go to Israel, get in a cab, drive with someone in Tel Aviv, talk to the driver, you'll get criticism of Israel. No, we're talking about hostility and unfairness, demonization, double standards, delegitimization of Israel. When Israel is being treated like a pariah, like no other country, when Israel is being dealt with in terms of classic anti-Semitic tropes, well, unfortunately, we know where that leads. So we have to be able to get everybody to define it in order to fight it, and then to stand up and fight it as much as possible. And Stand With Us was born in 2001. This year, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary globally. We've been active in the UK for 10 years. And our mission is to support Israel around the world, but also to fight anti-Semitism. And we see ourselves very much as a movement. And it's a movement that can include everyone, people from all different persuasions, all different politics, all different backgrounds, Jews and non-Jews. Critically, we need allies to stand up with the Jewish community and call out anti-Semitism. It should never be justified. And certainly people shouldn't be using criticism of Israel as a cover for that anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and I think one thing for me that I found fascinating over the last few weeks is Israel proudly has 1.9 million Arab Israelis who have full citizenship rights. They even sit, from everywhere to anywhere in society, to the High Court, to Knesset, etc., etc. But I think for the first time in many years, we've seen this kind of internal turmoil. I was speaking to somebody who has a business, and he's got employees who are Arab Israeli, who are Jewish Israeli, and there was real animosity for the first time that they hadn't had in the past. We saw what took place in Lod, the riots in Akko throughout Israel. What's the answer to ensure that doesn't happen? And what's that like on the ground? And do you have, I'm sure you have Arab friends and employees and people who work with you. Tell us a little bit about that relationship and some of that perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't overplay it and I wouldn't underplay it. It was a horrible part of the conflict, a few weeks ago, to see that play out and to see very real violence and very real death. A Jewish man was murdered as a result, and there was, violence, and there was unfortunately a disproportionate amount of violence from Arab to Jews, and unfortunately there was any violence from Jews to Arabs. There shouldn't be on either side any violence, for sure. But what you were seeing was a flashpoint of extremists. I genuinely believe that. I know it's in the heart of most Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs to live together and to work together. And of course, you will never see that on the news. I always say that in Israel, quiet coexistence happens every single day. And I know it from my own life. And it starts, by the way, from birth. 3 of my kids were born here in Israel in a hospital that serves 50% Arabs and 50% Jews. They have this interesting anachronistic place in Israeli hospitals called the Tinokia, where basically when your child is born, they'll take the children and put them in a room all next to each other so that the mother sleeps. Something that we did not experience in Barnet General. And so you can opt in or opt out, by the way, you don't have to, but you know, my wife decided to opt in. And so when I visited my newborn, they're in this Tinokia, which, you know, where these nurses, who are angels, are caring for God knows how many children screaming from birth. But, you know, Moshe is next to Muhammad, Miriam is next to Mariam. And so it goes. And so I always say, if you want to see coexistence, go and visit an Israeli hospital. And the last faces that I saw before I was given a life-saving operation were an Arab and a Jewish doctor working together to save my life. Quiet coexistence happens every single day in Israel. We see it all across industry, all across society. And so, yes, there are these flashpoints, and we have to make sure that we are I always think education is the answer. And so we have to make sure that we're educating our children in all segments of society towards peace and peaceful coexistence with each other. I think it's important that Jewish kids learn Arabic in the same way that Arab kids learn Hebrew. And so these are ways that we will push forward, because the truth is that in this region, and unfortunately, it's a terribly low bar, but in this region, Israel is a beacon of coexistence and prosperity, and not just equality. Arab citizens of Israel have more rights than their Arab, peers in the Arab Middle East, bar none, bar no other country. So we should be worried. We don't want any violence at all. But I think that the biggest part of the story is often the one that isn't told.
Wow. Michael, the last 2 years have been mad, right? The last 18 months has just been like nothing any of us have lived through. And a lot of what you do in Stand With Us is obviously advocacy, bringing people to Israel, internships, dealing with tourists day to day. How Stand With Us like kind of adapted during the pandemic, and how are you kind of reinventing yourself and re-emerging in the post-pandemic world, which Israel has really been a trailblazer in?
Yeah, it's been an interesting time. You know, we're about to be basically dropping, I think, practically all COVID measures in terms of mask wearing and everything else. I think they're going to become very kind of loose recommendations, because right now the amount of new cases, I mean, I don't think you can get a million of new COVID cases in the whole of Israel pretty soon. So that's amazing, and we should be proud of that. Any loss is too many. We suffered like everyone suffered. And I know the Jewish community suffered terribly in the UK. This has been an interesting time in that we've all had to adapt. And so we have. I mean, we were very quick to move to online, I guess because the COVID hit Israel a bit earlier than it hit the UK, Europe, and the US, or certainly most parts of them. And so we were able to, we have a significant operation here in Israel that we've built up over the last 15 years since I made Aliyah. And we have a center in King David Street that in a normal year will have tens of thousands of people visiting. And of course, this year or this last couple of years was not normal. But instead we pivoted to online learning. And so all the sessions that we would ordinarily run for high schoolers or for university students, we did online, and suddenly the world was open to us. So in addition to our outstanding Stand With Us UK team, who are on the ground and been going into, you know, in a normal year, again, going into schools and hosting events and so forth, we were able to open up our entire global team of educators to audiences in the UK and all around. So that's been incredible. You know, I can sit in front of my webcam and teach kids in South Africa and be beamed into their classrooms, and it's been an amazing experience. So we have also launched Stand With Us TV in that time, and it's on standwithus.tv as a website, and we've been able to interview the great and the good, and run amazing interactive programming. And so actually, I think in the last year, we've reached way more people than we ordinarily would. And then the conflict just recently, we reached 102 million people all across our social media platforms, wow, which is just a staggering number. And it's something that we've been, you know, we've invested in and we've been creative with. And we just have really great dynamic educators to work at StandWithUs Israel, to believe in Israel and to be inspired by Israel. And that's what drives us. So it's driven us through this whole crazy time.
Kol hakavod to you. I have one final question. My final question is really as follows. You know, that in one of your videos, you talk about the idea that will our children have the same ideals as us? Will they think the same way as us? We sometimes see that kids aren't as Zionistic as their parents. Kids don't understand or have that same sense of connection and identity with Israel. I remember even in JFS, there was a group of students who wanted to come and open the Palestinian Society within JFS, which in itself is a whole different discussion. But how do we make sure the next generation have that love and passion of Israel? And my question is really in two parts. First of all, for the parents' perspective, how do the parents try to pass over that tradition and love and connection with Zionism and Eretz Israel? And also, for the young people, how do they become more educated and clued up and more passionate about Israel? We've seen Israel tours not happening, which is such a sad thing. We've seen them really, kids scared on campus to openly show their Magen David, to show that they're Jewish. How do we try and embolden them to feel that fire and passion that you have in your belly?
Yeah, it's so important. Look, we always say that Zionists aren't born, they need to be raised. And so it is all about upbringing and parenting and teaching. But I think we need to understand, when I was at JFS, I was director of informal Jewish education. So my whole mission was to infuse daily life with positive Judaism and with a taste of Israel in ways that, lifted people's spirit, that wasn't formal teaching. And so I think parents need to understand that you can't export this upbringing to teachers or schools and assume that in itself is going to be adequate. It's up to you to infuse that in the daily life of your kids. And yes, Israel tours and all of that. Let's hope they will come back soon. We've, in the meantime, been able to run sessions where we take people to the Kotel. We put notes for people in the Kotel. We do a live tour with a camera crew and an amazing, passionate guide, and we bring them to Yerushalayim. And so we'll do as much as we can, but parents have to prioritize it as well. And so the more interaction points you can make with Israel and Israelis, the better. And the more you can help young people understand what role Israel plays in their life, the better. And, for religious people, that will obviously be a religious place, but they need to also understand that Israel is the place where Judaism began. Indians come from India, Chinese come from China, Jews come from Israel. So there is no Judaism without Israel. It's intrinsic and it's part of our identity, and it's part of our identity that we should be proud with. So I think that we have a duty to do that. There are so many ways you can do it. The whole online learning also helps, but really, whatever you're interested in as a young person, you'll find it in Israel. Whatever your politics are as an adult, you'll find it in Israel. Whatever the touch points are in your life, you'll find them in Israel. You mentioned my book. I wrote a book about Israeli resilience, right? What have we needed in this time of COVID, in times of conflict, when facing anti-Semitism, or in general life, whether we're Jewish or not? We need resilience to push ourselves through. And so the book is all about meeting amazing Israelis, finding out what drives them, how they've overcome unbelievable tragedy and risen above it, and how we can then be resilient too. But in doing so, we also weave through it the story of Israel, from its geography, its history, its diversity, and so much more. And so I think there are so many ways that we can bind people to Israel and have them love and be inspired by Israel. When it comes to the slurs and the misinformation, Israel is, to quote Shakespeare, more sinned against than sinning. I genuinely believe that no country is perfect. We've spoken about that, but that Israel has so much to offer the world. And so whether we're looking at Israeli resilience, we're looking at the Israeli people, we're looking at history, we're looking at our eternal bond to this country, or we're looking at the things that we love about Israel, be it sport or Eurovision, it doesn't really matter. There are so many touch points to bring into our children's lives, and that's what we should be trying to do.
Well, Michael Dickson, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hatzlacha with your amazing work.
Thank you. God bless. Thanks for having me.
You feel the connection deeply. The pride and the people inspire you. You yearn for peace. and hope that your children and your grandchildren will love and support Israel. You want to inspire them to care as you do, to protect Israel's future. Do you take for granted that they will know what you know and feel what you feel? Do they know how far we have come, where we've been, where we are going? Will they be inspired and rise to the task? Will they stand tall for Israel? Will they understand never again? Our children on college campuses are being challenged for their support of Israel.
We support the Antifada! We support the Antifada! Israel is a terrorist state! Israel is a terrorist state!
They attack our children, our communities, your children, your community. Every day requires courage and strength. They are told that they don't belong. And their voices don't matter.
Let's get off our campus now. I've been in this campus for 10 years. Get the f*** off our campus now.
That our history, our nation, our people don't matter.
Zionism must be destroyed. It must be gotten rid of. Every aspect of it.
You want to stand tall, to make a difference, to make sure that our pride shines through, that our children and our neighbors and their children will know what to do, to show a legacy of pride, strength, and peoplehood. This is what Stand With Us does. That is who Stand With Us is. We represent you when you can't be there, with 18 offices around the globe. We represent you in our high schools, where we reach 50,000 students each year with the beauty of Israel and foster the next generation of Zionist leaders. We are your voice on campus, training students how to lead and reach over 100,000 of their peers each year in the face of intolerance and bigotry. We represent you when we reach 100 million people on Facebook during peak weeks. We educate for the future by sponsoring speaking tours and holding conferences around the world, training leaders and lifting communities. We are your hotline when rights are trampled on and emergency pro bono legal services are needed, with over 150 attorneys standing by for students, faculty, and community members. We represent your legacy when we partner with over 750 different organizations around the world who care as you do about Israel. We are working in your name when we use innovative teaching methods to inspire middle schoolers with the wonder of Israel. We represent you when it's time to push back. We represent you when it's time to share Israel's story, when it's time to teach, to stand up, to show undying pride for Israel. And we have only just begun. Help us reach more of the world. Help us empower more of our children, your children, to be courageous, to be confident, to fight smart, to win, and to always, always stand tall.